Hey folks, it's been a while since I've had a chance to make a video. Been working on some other projects, but I have some time on my hands, so let's get this thing started. I was listening to a podcast the other day, and they were talking about the seven deadly sins, and I thought, I don't know if you guys really have a grasp of what you're talking about. Not that they were completely clueless, but they've just got this really basic understanding, and I thought, I don't know if a lot of people really understand the seven deadly sins. I don't know if they really get where it came from or what it's trying to get at. So I thought, hey, let's spend some time actually talking about that. So here we go. The first thing you might want to know if you're dealing with the seven deadly sins is where it came from. It's not like the seven deadly sins were always part of Christian history, like they sprung up with Jesus or something. It's something the church developed over time. And it started in the 4th century with a theologian by the name of Evagrius. And Evagrius eventually became a monk, and he was trying to help other monks figure out how do you deal with life as a monk, and how do you pray and meditate and do all these kinds of things that will help you get closer to God when you've got all these problems, all these challenges that you're facing. And so he created this list of 8 temptations. And he said, if you understand these 8 temptations, if you recognize these things happening in you, then you can deal with them and you can combat them before they actually turn into sin. You just said 8, but there's only 7 deadly sins. Given time, after a couple of centuries, the church took 2 of those 8 temptations and they kind of went, yeah, these are kind of the same thing, so let's just glue those things together. So when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about the original 8 with a little bit of how it got modified over time. The first one I want to talk about is the 2 that got glued together, which is vainglory and pride. Vainglory is what we normally think of when we hear the term pride. We think of people who just can't stop name-dropping, people that are constantly making it all about themselves, people who are praising themselves, and, hey, did you know that I did whatever it is that's so incredibly fantastic? They're, to be blunt, they're narcissists. They want it to be all about themselves, and they want people to pay attention to them, and they want the praise and all this stuff. It's all about them. See, the temptation that Evagrius was originally getting at was this sense that maybe people aren't actually noticing me. You see, the temptation that Evagrius was getting at was this desire to be noticed, the desire to be seen. This temptation that crops up where it's like I'm alone or I'm unseen and I'm doing so well and people don't seem to care. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it can become a temptation if it really becomes something that you focus on too much. The sin comes when you actually do want the attention on yourself, and it kind of doesn't matter what happens to all these other people. And that doesn't matter anymore. That's vainglory. That's narcissism. It's all about me. Admittedly, it's built into us to some extent. We do want attention on ourselves, and that's not necessarily bad. We do live in relationships, and we want people to notice us and see us and pay attention to us. So that in of itself is not bad. It's when it starts to become to the exclusion of other people that it really becomes a problem. So one of the things that we need to remember in order to combat this temptation of vainglory is to remember that God does see you, and that God does notice you, and that God does care about you, and that God has placed people around you in the church. Maybe you need to go out and find them, but there's people out there that do care about you, that do see you, and do want to know you, and that you don't need to create attention for yourself if you just are yourself. Of course, if you're thinking, wait, if that's what I thought pride was, and you told me that's vainglory, so what's pride? Pride is a little more subtle. It's not something that we think about very often, but it is a huge deal, particularly in American culture. You can look at pride as sheer independence, individuality. It's sort of it's this Lone Ranger mentality. The Lone Ranger always have Tonto? Is he really lone when he has Tonto? The temptation of pride is to say, I can get what I need. I can do what I'm supposed to. I can accomplish all these things totally on my own, in my own strength, in my own power. I don't need anybody else. The sin comes when you really seriously reject other people and you say, I am an island unto myself. I am sufficient unto myself. I don't need other people, and I especially don't need God. And this is a huge thing in American culture. We are a massively individualistic culture. So we want to do things on our own. We want things to be about us, and we want to be able to say that we don't need other people, that we are really islands. But the reality is that we do need other people. We're part of communities. We're part of something that's much, much bigger than ourselves, and we need to recognize that. And for that matter, every breath we take is a gift from God. At any moment, God could say, I don't feel like supporting the universe any longer, and we'd be gone. So we have to recognize we need God's support. We need God's care. We need God just to get through our days sometimes. So the antidote to pride is dependence, is a recognition that we aren't all that, a recognition that we aren't sufficient, and a reaching out to other people to say, hey, I need you. God, I need you. We are needy people, and we have to accept that fact. It's not bad. It's just the truth of who we are. The next sin I want to look at, wrath. Wrath is pretty straightforward, but not entirely. You see, we tend to think of anger in general as a bad thing. Anger is a sin, and yet it really isn't. If we get angry at other people, that's not always a sin. It can be, but sometimes it's just a natural response. When somebody really gets in your way and somebody is really trying to stop you from doing something that you need to do, anger is a natural response, and it's an appropriate one. Anger in of itself is not bad. Anger can actually be really useful. In fact, God got angry. Paul said to the Ephesians, in your anger, do not sin. So the anger itself isn't sin. Well, then what is? When does anger turn into this sin of wrath? It becomes wrath when that anger begins to control you, when that anger fuels your decisions. Anger should influence you, but it shouldn't control you. When you start lashing out at people, or when you sort of start plotting things because you're just so frustrated, when the anger becomes a major piece of your decisions and your actions and your choices, that's when it becomes wrath. It doesn't have to be this angry, lashing out, rage kind of thing. It can even be this sort of cold, calculating bitterness or resentment, just so long as it's controlling you in some fashion. That's the sin of wrath. So how do you deal with this temptation of wrath? Well, the first thing you do is you recognize that anger isn't necessarily a bad thing, that it's just a natural reaction to things that happen, and to understand that anger can actually be useful. It can give you the energy to push through barriers and overcome obstacles. That's actually a really good thing. The problem, of course, is when it becomes something that controls you, so you have to learn to control your own anger. As you practice, as you experience anger, and you learn to recognize that you're feeling angry and that it doesn't have to control you, you can begin to make choices that are more wise and more helpful and more in line with what God wants you to do. Other times, however, it's deeper than that, and you need something to deal with that anger, to sort of release that energy. Recognize that anger is a response to something stopping you. It's a response of you not getting something you want or need. And if that's the case, if you're not getting something, well then instead of being angry, you ought to be grieving. You ought to be learning to let go. You ought to be learning to trust God, that even when you aren't getting what it is that you think you need, God's still got your back. Grief is a huge antidote to anger and wrath. Last one I want to look at this time is envy. Envy starts with, I want what she has. That in of itself is fine. I know people in my neighborhood who have Tesla Roadsters. I really want a Tesla Roadster. And that's okay. I also have to accept that, given my current income, I'm never going to have one. And that's fine for now. When envy becomes a problem is when it starts to break relationship. When your feelings of, I want what she has, starts to become, and now I'm ticked off because she has it and I want somehow to hurt her or to somehow take revenge on him solely because he has something I want, it's becoming about the person more than it becomes about the object. If your feelings of envy, if your desires for something or for somebody start breaking relationship, that's where envy becomes a problem. And that's where it starts to become sinful. How do you deal with this one? you learn to be grateful, and you learn to be content. You learn to trust that God is going to take care of you and that God really is going to give you the things that you need and you want, recognizing that the things that you really want aren't necessarily going to make you happy. So that's it for the first 4 of the 8 deadly temptations, or the 7 deadly sins. Next time we will take a look at sloth, gluttony, lust, and greed. If you have any thoughts or questions about the 7 deadly sins that I haven't talked about so far, I'd love to hear from you. You can talk about things in the comments down below. Please, if you liked this video, hit the like button, and if I've earned it, please hit subscribe. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.